Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. This is our 4th annual Arbor Day speaker series celebrating trees. So we're so glad you've joined us as part of our campus Arbor Day celebration. We're really excited to welcome our 3 wonderful speakers who have generously given their time to talk with us today. My name is Kristen Haynes, and along with Kamal Mohammed, we co-direct our Canal Forest Restoration Project. If you're not familiar, we are aimed at growing, distributing, and teaching people the importance of native trees for a variety of environmental and human perspectives of why it's important to bring them back on our landscape. Helping with the project this year are our wonderful interns, Julia Binther and Liz Triana in the back. So I want to give them a huge thanks, as well as I'll give a shout out to Robert, who is a past intern and he's tuning in today. So thank you all. And with this, I'm going to turn it over to Julia to introduce our first speaker.
All right. Thank you. My mini microphone. All right. So for our first speaker, we have Susanna Keriö. She's joining us on Zoom because she's in Connecticut. She works at the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station in the Department of Environmental Forestry and Science. And she is a forest pathologist and ecologist, and her current research is on tree fungal interactions, tree stress signatures, and their applications in tree care. And today she's going to be giving a talk on urban trees and their health in a changing climate. So go ahead, Suzanne.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak at your event. Can you all see the slides? Probably? Yes, perfect. Yes. So yeah, just a couple of words. I'm in Connecticut at the Agricultural Experiment Station, and my research focuses on how to manage urban trees for the better, how to keep them healthy in urban environments. And today I want to talk to you about how climate change affects tree health. First, cover some aspects of why trees are so valuable and how climate change affects tree health. And then I'm going to share some information on a new research project that I have started here in New Haven on urban maple condition. And then last, cover some aspects on how we can best grow resilient trees under climate change. So urban trees are beautiful. They beautify our landscape. They provide so many aesthetic benefits. I mean, who wouldn't be excited about trees? I am. But they also provide very tangible economic benefits to our society. So for instance, urban forestry and tree care sector in Midwest and Northeastern states creates jobs for 375,000 people, creates a 17.6 billion in industry outputs, and corresponds to a 16 billion payroll. So we're talking about significant impacts on our economy. And additionally, in New York, urban foresters are managing the air purification capacity worth of $408 million and a carbon stock worth of $5.7 billion. And especially the health benefits from the smallest particle removal are significant for human health. For instance, in Syracuse alone, this ecosystem service is estimated to be about $1.1 million, whereas in New York City, which is a larger city with more people, this ecosystem service is even more valuable at $60 million. And in Northeast US, a lot of people live in urban areas, and in New York, 88% of people live in urban areas. And in statewide, in New York has about 49% of urban tree cover. But this varies a lot within New York. For instance, Syracuse has only 27% of urban tree cover. And this is significant, having enough trees in urban areas is significant because the urban population in the US is predicted to reach nearly 90% by 2050, which means that the role of urban trees and urban forests is going to be even more important in the future. If you would have to choose one benefit that urban trees provide to cities, I would say that it's cooling. Because, for instance, on global scale, trees sequester carbon from the atmosphere. So this actually cools down the whole planet. But then locally, the trees also reduce the cooling costs of buildings, and it has been estimated that this is to the extent of 20 to 30%, and it also results into energy savings of 7%. And shading and protection against the elements is also a really significant benefit. On this slide, you see this the very colorful image, which is an infrared, which was captured with an infrared camera. It shows you the blue regions in the image as the areas that are in the shade of a large urban tree in a park. And then those red and yellow shades of color are the ones that are outside the tree canopy. And you can see that between the blue and the red areas, there is even a 40 degrees Fahrenheit difference in surface temperature. So this kind of perfectly demonstrates the value of having urban trees in cities. But unfortunately, we know that the benefits of this cooling and the particle matter removal from the air are not equally distributed across the urban US communities. And it seems that the urban communities with the lowest socioeconomic status also happen to have the lowest tree cover. So in Syracuse, for instance, the poorest census blocks have 18% less tree cover, and they are also about 3.8 Fahrenheit degrees warmer than the richer census blocks. On this slide, you see these different maps. The first one is showing the canopy gap, the second one, the surface temperature, and the third one of people in poverty. And typically the darker the shades of color are, the more of this metric you have. So for instance, on the canopy gap map, if you have yellow color, it means that these parts of Syracuse have lower tree cover. And these seem to align well. So the higher or the lower the urban tree canopy cover is, the higher the surface temperatures are, and the more people in poverty you also have in these regions. So this situation for Syracuse is not by any means the worst case that you can have. Actually, in Connecticut, you have one of the highest disparities in the nation between Stamford and Bridgeport, where Bridgeport has 50% less tree cover, and the poorest census blocks are also 7.2 degrees Fahrenheit warmer. And why this is significant, it's because heat stroke is the #1 weather killer in the US, causing 600 deaths per year. And this means that these areas which have less tree cover are also more vulnerable to the impact of climate change in the future. So you might ask, are trees the answer? The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report lists carbon storage and people-centered urban design as some of the strategies that urban areas can use and apply to mitigate the impacts of climate change. And this report also mentions forests or forestry more than 2,000 times. But really the challenge is, how do we best maintain this green infrastructure in a changing climate? So next I'm going to cover some aspects like how climate change impacts urban tree health. And I must start by saying that typically it is not just one thing that kills trees, because tree health is an outcome of the host stress tolerance and interaction with pathogens and pests and the environment. So if we start from the host stress tolerance, so the better resistance the trees have to the various biotic agents that impact them, the better are their chances of survival. And then when you add the layer of pests and pathogens, when you're dealing with native pathogens and pests, these are usually not the ones that will kill them like immediately, but it's the number of attacks or level of infection that determines whether the tree is going to survive or not. And then it's a different case for invasive pests and pathogens. Some of the invasive pests that impact tree health include chestnut blight, Dutch elm disease, emerald ash borer, and Asian longhorn beetles. These pests are very destructive because they lack co-evolutionary history with their host trees. So the trees essentially lack resistance to these pathogens. And in the case of invasive insects, they lack natural enemies, which means that the trees have lower likelihood of surviving any infestation. But then there is the impact of environment, which includes several factors such as precipitation, temperature, light, wind, snow, and ice damages. And also in the case of urban trees, especially soil and drought impact tree health very heavily. Because it has been estimated that in landscape settings, even 90% of tree health problems are related to poor soil conditions, which amplifies drought stress in urban areas. And soil environment in urban settings, some of the challenges include low water storage capacity. There is also very limited space to grow healthy roots. Also pavement and compaction causes the water not being able to reach the roots. And there is also no air. Pavement has been shown to reduce the oxygen levels in the soil significantly. And also heat stress levels are higher in urban environments. And these impacts are all amplified by climate change. And in urban areas, the pavement increases the surface and air temperatures, causing increased evapotranspiration and water loss, which results into higher levels of stress. And this increase in the temperature is called the urban heat island effects, where the structures radiate the heat that they have reserved back into the tree canopies. And if you add drought to this equation, this can then cause carbon starvation and hydraulic failure in trees, which can then eventually result into tree death. And the area of impermeable surfaces has increased in urban areas, and we can also expect to see higher and stronger heat island impacts in the coming years. And this kind of is also used, or these urban conditions can be used to sort of predict what is going to happen for the trees which are not currently in urban conditions, because cities already have higher temperatures than the surrounding areas. And the climate change projections indicate that, for instance, spring and winter rainfall is predicted to increase. And in northern New York, the increase in springtime rainfall has been predicted to be as high as 15 to 20%. This is really good news for foliar pathogens, such as rusts and beech leaf disease, which require high levels of humidity to be able to infect their hosts. But then extreme precipitation can also cause erosion and floods, which then impacts negatively the condition of roots. And on the flip side, when we are getting more spring and winter precipitation, we are also seeing less rainfall during the summer, which then results in the droughts during the active growing season of the trees. And for instance, last year in September, 56% of New York State was either abnormally dry or in drought. And on this slide, on the bottom panel, you can see this timeline, which shows the incidence of New York drought severity within the past 20 years. And whenever you have this dark peak on these graphs, it means that there was a drought event. And the larger, the wider the peak is, the longer the drought was, and the higher the peak is, the more severe the drought was. And there have been several drought periods within the past 10 years, especially 2017 was a very high drought year. And also last year, the last couple of years have been very dry in the Northeast and the US. And also along with related to climate change, the temperatures in New York have increased almost 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit since the early 1900s. And the 2000s have seen several record high temperatures never seen before. On the good side, this means that the trees would have a longer growing season and more time to photosynthesize, which could have growth promoting impacts. But on the other hand, tree respiration, especially from the roots, also increases, and this can offset the gains in growth. Also, pest and disease pressure will increase because there are no longer sufficiently cold and sufficiently long periods of cold weather which would then kill the populations of pests and pathogens. For instance, for hemlock woolly adelgid, the warmer weather is a good news. And if the trees will start breaking dormancy earlier in the season, this also exposes the trees to spring frosts. And if they lose their leaves, this is a huge energy cost for the trees to produce a new flush of leaves. I mean, trees are able to do this. They are amazing creatures. They have an amazing capacity to survive. But if this happens too many times, it's gonna be very distressing for the trees. And also with the warming weather, we may have less snow, and reduced snowpack has been shown to reduce the carbon in wood core samples even by 40%. So this is also bad news for tree growth. So climate change is bad for trees because the trees are adapted to grow within a range of light, temperature, precipitation, and humidity conditions. And for many tree species, the climate is changing too rapidly and adaptation is not possible. We talk about these losers and winners of climate change. And for instance, in New York, it's likely that several conifers, such as black spruce and balsam fir, are not going to be doing so well under the changing climate. Also, riparian species, such as gray and river birch, are maybe not doing so well. On the other hand, oaks, which are highly drought resistant, and hickories may be doing well under the changing climate. And besides climate change, also land use change and the presence of invasive pests and pathogens will determine how well these trees will actually fare under the changing climate. And what we also see after drought is that the carbohydrate reserves in trees can be significantly impacted by droughts. For instance, in oaks, normally they have about 2.5% of carbon in the wood samples. And then after drought, these levels can drop to 0.4%. And without these critical resources for growth and recovery from stress, trees have lower likelihood of surviving. For instance, biotic attacks by defoliating insects such as spongy moth. It's been shown that if carbohydrate levels drop below 1.5% when trees are experiencing repeated defoliations by spongy moth, these trees have a much higher likelihood of dying. And also what is worth saying is recovery of these carbohydrate reserves can take even 2 years. And these 2 years, everything has to go perfect. So there should be no defoliation, there should be no drought. And these kinds of conditions are going to be more and more difficult to find under the changing climate. If you're interested in learning more about the drought conditions in your area, you can check out these 2 resources. So for instance, the New York has a drought management task force with useful links for learning more about the drought impacts in your area. And also Drought Monitor, you can find information for all areas in New York to see what kind of drought conditions are prevailing at the moment. And next, I will present a couple of findings from a new study that we started in January this year in New Haven, Connecticut, to see how tree condition is impacted by pavement and heat stress, and how it's associated with carbohydrate levels in urban trees. So what we have learned from surveys which have been done since 2000 is that maple mortality in New Haven has increased from 30% to 45%. And what is kind of alarming is that 75% of young red maple trees are lost. This is likely associated with drought because also Connecticut has suffered severe levels of drought stress within the past 10 years, but we are not exactly sure if it's drought that killed these trees. So this kind of merited starting a project that will monitor urban tree health condition in New Haven, and our interest was to see if paved area under the canopy is associated with maple health and tree condition. So this relates to estimating the impacts of urban heat island on tree health. And it's also important to remind that 90% of urban tree health issues are soil related, and drought and compaction, and the amount of paved area are important factors in this. So what we did, we selected 118 maples in New Haven, which are growing as street trees with equal numbers of Norway red and sugar maples in 3 different neighborhoods. We measured the tree size and then recorded the incidence of various tree stress indicators in these trees. And preliminary, what we found out, first of all, how much the trees provide shade. The canopy area corresponds to about 2 American football fields. So this is how much shading the trees are providing. It's kind of a large surface area when you think about it. And what we also saw is that trees in these locations which have higher surface temperatures were shorter and had smaller canopies. So on this slide, you see the locations of these experimental trees on this map. And what you also see on the map is the surface temperature in that location. And the darker shades of red indicate that the location has a higher surface temperature. And then on the right side on this slide, you see a correlation plot. And whenever on the correlation plot, if you have a colored square, it means that there was a significant correlation. And if there was a negative correlation, the squares are blue. And if it's a positive correlation, then the squares are red. And I want to point out the connection between the surface temperature in the locations and its association with canopy size and height. So what we saw is that the locations which have higher surface temperatures had smaller canopies, and also trees which had lower heights. And Westville neighborhood, which had the lowest surface temperature, also had the largest trees with the largest canopy area. So it seems that the heat island effect might be at play also in New Haven. But we also saw a lot of the trees had bark damages on trunk. And then this tree is a good example. If you have missing bark, damaged sapwood, epicormic shoots, buried color, root damages, those are kind of all indicators that there is something wrong with this tree. This tree turned out to be decayed. So this kind of shows you what happens if a tree is exposed to mechanical damage. Regarding biotic damages, we didn't see that much, but it might associate to the fact that we did this survey in winter. And we also did not survey every single tree in the city. Not too many trees had fruiting bodies, but we saw sooty mold on 41% of sugar maples. And sooty mold it's a saprotrophic fungus. It shouldn't be harmful for the trees, but it will be interesting to see if the incidence of sooty mold is associated with the sugar levels in these trees. A lot of the trees also had root damages. For instance, of red maples, 100%, every single tree had some degree of root damages. And for Norway maple, even 36% of the trees had their root collar buried. So this is also not a good situation for the trees because it also exposes the trees to decay. And then also if you have girdling roots, it reduces the tree vigor. 73% of these trees had girdling roots as well. So on average, one urban maple provides 100 square meters of shade, which corresponds to the footprint of a very small house or a large apartment or a good sized apartment. Sugar maples with their largest canopies, they provided the most shading. Damages were very common in trunks and roots. And what our preliminary results indicate is that urban hotspots may support lower tree health levels. So before planting any trees, it might be advisable to check the land surface temperature data before deciding what kind of tree is planted in the location. And last, some insights into how can we grow climate resilient trees and why proper tree care is more important than ever. So first of all, before you start planting trees, it's important to choose the right tree for the right place. And tree species vary greatly in their drought responses. So if you have a very dry location, it's a bad idea to plant trees which are very sensitive to drought, such as trees which grow by rivers and they require a lot of water. There is a large variation in drought tolerance of like even within species between different cultivars of the same species. So it's good to inquire and find out about this before deciding what is to be planted in each location. And there is definitely room to improve the diversity of the species that are planted in urban areas. And also we should maybe focus on planting more native trees. And one great resource to find this information is the woody plants database maintained by Cornell University. In this database, you can enter your site characteristics, and then the database will give you back a list of trees which might be suitable for any specific location. And also a good resource to see is the Climate Change Tree Atlas, where you can find local information for which trees might do well under the changing climate and which trees may not be so well adapted in the changing climate. And then some do's and don'ts. First, maybe a couple of the don'ts. So this phenomena here, it's called volcano mulch. So mulch usually is used to protect the roots from drying, but if you put a pile of mulch at the base of the tree, it kind of corresponds to a situation when you have a Band-Aid on your finger and you leave the Band-Aid on there for too long, and your skin, it comes all back like mushy and very exposed to wounding and damages. This is what you're effectively doing to the trees if you put a pile of mulch at the base of the tree, and it also creates a good habitat for pests and pathogens to flourish. And it also encourages the development of girdling roots. And if you have a high layer of mulch, like too thick layer, then the water actually may not reach the roots, and then the mulch may actually make the drought stress worse for the trees. Another way you can kill a tree is to plant it too high, which means that the roots have harder time accessing water and anchoring the tree. This also exposes the roots to frost damage and tipping over. And there is really no point in planting a very expensive tree to a very badly prepared tree planting pit. In this case, there's a question is, which one of these is a tree? Which one of these is a power line pole? So whenever you see trees which look like power line poles, you cannot even see the root flare. It means that the tree is planted way too deep. This often happens when homeowners, they decide to plant a lawn in the root growth space, and they pile extra soil so that they can, get a nice lawn going. But this is not really good for the trees, because doing this, burying the root collar too deep, exposes the bark to damage and increases the risk of decay. And if there is lawn in the root growth space, this increases the risk of mechanical damage from lawn mowing and weed whacking. And on this slide, the tree number 1 has some dieback in the top of the canopy. And when you go around the tree, you see this huge cavity at the base of the tree. It's pretty easy to guess what caused this. It was either a lawnmower or a weed whacker. If you had added if somebody had added some mulch around the base of the tree, this would have prevented the development of lawn and weeds around the base of the tree. And then this mechanical damage could have been effectively avoided. Tree number 2, there is also some dieback in the top of the canopy. And when you look closely, there are these fairy lights. So somebody has, decided to beautify the urban space. They're very pretty, I agree. But this is effectively damaging the bark and impacting negatively the ability of the tree to transport carbohydrates through the phloem. And then tree number 3, there is a tree well, which makes the street look really nice and clean, but it is effectively girdling the tree and exposing it to damages and decay. So there are other ways, to kill the trees besides having invasive pests and pathogens and climate change. Like humans are very effective in causing horrible things to trees. Post-pathogen environment interaction. If you plant trees in locations which are not optimal for them, you may make things worse for the trees. With the increasing spring precipitation, we are likely to see more of, for instance, cedar apple rust. So this is a native pathogen. It is usually not able to kill the tree, but with repeated infections, things can become really problematic for the trees, especially if trees are planted in these hotspots, such as close to buildings or next to air conditioning exhaust pipes. You may expose the tree to increasing heat stress, which then makes the conditions for the pathogen better. In this case, it might be possible to prune off the dead branches to improve airflow in the canopy. But the best thing really would be to just not to plant the tree right next to buildings. Regarding new trees, it's important to provide sufficient levels of irrigation for them. It's recommended to give newly planted trees 25 gallons of water per week during spring and summer. And deep watering is important so that the root systems will be established in the deeper layers of the soil. Important to leave enough space and then keep an eye on the trees, and also use good soil when you're planting. And for instance, by adding organic matter to the soil can help alleviate compaction and also improve the soil water content compared to situations where you only have clay or sandy soil, which has been slightly modified. Also, don't plant any invasive trees. We already have plenty of issues with invasive pests, pathogens, and abiotic stress. The New England states, several of them have already banned the planting of tree of heaven, Norway maple, and sycamore maple. One very problematic species is calorie pear. It is definitely a known invasive species, but many of the states in the Northeast have not taken steps to ban this, probably because of economical reasons. So in summary, in the Northeast US, we are going to likely see more issues from warmer springs, droughts, low snowpack, pests, and pathogens. And proper tree care is more crucial than ever. So when you plant the trees properly, protect them from damage, keep them water, and keep an eye on the trees. Favor drought-resistant trees and don't plant any invasives. Increase species and genetic diversity, and explore new tree care and stress detection methods to keep the trees healthy. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Susanna. Do you think we have time for maybe like one question? Okay. Any questions online, Liz? Okay. Anybody have any questions here for Susanna? Okay, yes.
When she talked about the trees that would have less carbon when there was less snowfall in the winter months, does that mean that it wasn't processing carbohydrates well enough after less snowfall? Or what was the attribute that caused the carbon levels to go down in the winter?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think it's a combination of, the snow cover is really important for protecting the tree roots from freezing. And when you have freezing temperatures in the soil, the roots will die, and this will significantly impact the ability of the trees to uptake water and nutrients. And the roots are also an important location for storing the carbon. And then this might negatively impact the storages of carbon in other parts of the tree.
All right, awesome. Okay, I think it's time for us to move on to our other speakers. So thank you so much for joining us, Susanna. We really appreciate it. And next we'll move on to Laura Donnelly.
Thank you, Susanna.
You want to come step that up? I'll introduce her. All right, so Laura Donnelly, she works here at SUNY Oswego in the creative writing department. She is the director of the creative writing program. She teaches poetry classes, and last semester she also taught a nature writing class. She's also had many of her poems published in national literary magazines. And today she's going to be talking about creativity in nature, sharing some of her works and others about trees and nature. So go on.
Awesome, thank you. I'm just going to put the microphone on a second,
Yeah.
if I can do that. Is it already on? There it is. We want the PowerPoint shared. I don't think so. There's not much on. I have a PowerPoint up for folks who are on Zoom. There's not much on it. It's just to keep me from straying mostly. Okay, I think I have the microphone on.
Next. The camera's right here, so I'm just stand that way so people can see.
Okay. So how is this on the camera? Do I need to move?
No, but through Zoom.
For Zoom. Yeah. Okay, awesome. I'm going to start with a poem. This is a poem about walking trails at places like Rice Creek here, trails that go in a loop, or out at the middle school, which is where I usually walk. It's called In the Round. Where I walk is a comfort, a canopy of trees. I take the same trail east, then west. I have always liked a loop, practicing a page of Bach over and over, or just knitting. In the round, we say, when the ends are connected, the body knit whole instead of in pieces. I think of my own body whole in pieces, and the edges of my mind walking out of rooms, stuck to other people's cups like so many burrs. In the woods, the burrs come back to me. So I have set my clicker down somewhere. So thank you so much for including me, Julia and Liz and Kristen and Kamal. I'm going to treat my portion of this mostly as a poetry reading because that is what I do. I'm going to share, I think, 8 poems in total, some by me, some by my favorite nature poets that I would like to introduce you to. But first, I'd like us to think for a moment about memory and the way that trees are woven into memory. And so I'd like you to think for a moment about a particular tree you can remember from your childhood or a neighborhood where you grew up. And my guess is that you can picture some specific tree, because trees work as markers of both place and the passing of time in our memories. And it can be uncanny to return to a place where we grew up and see a tree once small, now huge, or to return to a place and see a spot that used to have a big tree and now doesn't. These are pretty remarkable moments. So the next poem I'm going to share is one I wrote exploring a specific memory related to trees, including both how I kind of wish that I had paid more attention to them growing up, and how they nevertheless were infusing my childhood. And the slide here, this is a white pine tree that is outside of my childhood home in Michigan. in the winter, in the spring. This is this year. My mom texted me to these because she is awesome. So this tree was planted when I think I was maybe 10 or 11 years old, and it was less than a foot tall at that time. It actually came from by the garage of my mom's house, so it's traveled. For scale, the circle here shows the 2-story house behind it. And the arrow there points to my childhood bedroom window, which is indeed on the 2nd story. So the poem, it ends with this tree, but it starts with remembering making a leaf book project in middle school. How many of you had to make a leaf book project at some time? Did they still do the leaf books? Did they do them then? Well, so it's kind of about that too, but it ends with this tree. So the leaf book. Concanlore, my mother says, and then concanlore. Sound like a ball dropping and its rebound. I'm trying to make up for years of ignoring her saying the name of each tree. In the early 90s, she drove me through town, knowing where to find the good trees. The car left idling at the side of a highway while she crossed the ditch for a ginkgo. It must have been a middle school project, the leaf book. My friends and I practiced boredom before so much awe. But back home, we slipped leaves into clear plastic sleeves, books lumpy with pine cones and twigs. Now, some 30 years later, it's just neighborhood trees we're naming as we walk the blocks by her house. Hard maple, soft maple, one with roots that bubble at the surface, another diving deep. You can tell which is which by the leaves. The crease between the soft maple's points like a sharp knife's cuts in cold butter, or the hard maple's rounded out scoops. See the birch tree's elephant wrinkles, the sycamore's scales? Concanlore is my favorite new word. She pauses to pet its limbs like a beloved cat. New growth tipping upwards like candles, she says. And I see, though I failed to learn the trees' names, why I came to the world through connection. The hard pat of butter, the candle tree, the greening wonder around me. The white pine seedling planted 30 years ago now bows over my childhood home, rooted like my mother, who, for a time, I failed to notice, then noticed, and that was all it took. The language of trees all around me. Oh, thank you. So I think the poetry of trees is a poetry, it can be a poetry of grounding. And despite my early laziness with the leaf book, the fact is I do now really go to nature for a sense of grounding. It's also the best anecdote for writer's block, highly recommend it. But perhaps the poet who speaks best to this power of the natural world to ground us again is the poet Mary Oliver. And I feel like I'd be remiss at like an Arbor Day event to not bring Mary Oliver in. So I'm going to share a poem by Mary Oliver. This is her poem, When I Am Among the Trees, from her book, Thirst. When I am among the trees. When I am among the trees, especially the willows and the honey locust, equally the beech, the oaks, and the pines, they give off such hints of gladness. I would almost say that they save me, and daily. I am so distant from the hope of myself, in which I have goodness and discernment and never hurry through the world, but walk slowly and bow often. Around me, the trees stir in their leaves and call out, stay a while. The light flows from their branches and they call again, it's simple, they say. And you too have come into the world to do this, to go easy, to be filled with light
and to shine. So as I was mentioning, I take a lot of walks in the woods. I started doing that especially like during the pandemic. I always walked a lot, but during the early period of the pandemic, it was like even more every day. And again, I live out by the middle school trail, so I like getting to walk out there. But I was thinking about just like the sense of well-being that brought. And the natural world is made up of fractals. A lot of structures in the natural world are fractals. And fractals are kind of repeating patterns where if you zoom way out and look at the pattern, or if you zoom way in, you get sort of the same repetition going on. Studies have shown that being around fractals, viewing them, actually kind of like calms and quiets the mind, that we feel a better sense of well-being when we are around them. So this is another one of my poems. It's called Fractal. A relief to the eyes, this unfurling of fern, this pine cone swirl, rivers unbranching to a single wend. In the woods, my mouth is the size of a mushroom, coral and curled, and my hidden lungs travel like tree roots. Hands are the least of it, path damp, humus thawed, and beginning the wheel of glory of the snow, blue-winged teal, glimpse neurals into name and back, synapse sure as song and true as breath. So, well, I think the poetry of trees can comfort us. I think it also has a responsibility to discomfort us, or rather to bear witness to the vast environmental destruction that we are living through and reckoning with daily. So I'm going to read a couple of poems that kind of take this approach. In the image here, I'm showing an image where on this side of the screen is a giant sequoia from Kings Canyon National Park in California. It was felled in 1891. And on the other side, this is the same tree where it's housed in the Natural History Museum of London. And there's also a section of it in Washington, DC of the same tree. And recently they had to go through a massive conservation restoration of this, the same way people would do like a restoration project in an art museum on an old fresco or something like that. There's a fantastic time-lapse video online where you can watch them doing the restoration of this. But it just struck me, this irony, because the video is like the conserving the sequoia. And, you know, we think of conservation of trees usually in very different ways. And so I was thinking, what would it be if we were only conserving trees that we had in museums? So this poem is called Conserving the Sequoia. When they scrape back the gel, the trunk touches air. Medullary rays like an X marks the spot. Split in radials for shipping a century ago, it looks like an 11-hour clock, but vast and quieter than time. It takes a scaffold and team of small brushes. It is grand in deterioration as the finest Renaissance fresco, Botticelli, Michelangelo, God reaching while the lacquer cracks. Once it grew and fed and slept. 1,341 years, the cambium swelled with spring. In a forever black and white California, a man poses on a ladder. The tree that was taller than the Statue of Liberty lying on the ground behind him. On the ground, another man and then a woman in a white skirt. Their expressions are dwarfed by circumference. He removes his hat. She leans as if suddenly tired against 1,000 years of rings. So this next poem is about the emerald ash borer, which I thought I should read today since our next talk is about the emerald ash borer. And of course, everyone has a poem about the emerald ash borer. That's a totally normal thing to write about. I'm originally from Michigan, and of course the destruction of the emerald ash borer really started there, though I know now it has spread as these things do. So these are the trails made by the ash borer, and because I love language, or I'm intrigued by it, the fact that these trails are called galleries, at least that's something I've read, I find very interesting. So the poem's simply titled Emerald Ash Borer, and it starts with 2 epigraphs to give context, which you all don't need, because you know, other people don't have the context. So this is from National Wildlife Foundation. They say, people and the goods we use travel around the world very quickly and often carry uninvited species with them. And then the other is from the Arbor Day Foundation, who says the emerald ash borer has destroyed 40 million ash trees in Michigan alone and tens of millions throughout other states and Canada. Cut away, it looks like a maze, but they call it the gallery, these trails the beetle makes through cambium. Elsewhere, the ash evolved with the beetle. But here, millennia collapse, and with them, what defenses a tree might learn. Of course, we aren't the only creatures that move. One Arctic tern, banded, flew 40,000 miles before returning to Eastern Egg Rock. But how suddenly our leaps leapt across the sea. How surely we laid our rails. We who would not be half so jeweled if named for our hunger and destruction. What did evolution not check in our brains' expanding technology? You'll say I'm confusing evolution with God, but wasn't it once such a beauty? From evolvere, to unroll, roll out, especially of books. A verb for an obsolete scroll, now a noun that includes in its meanings a pattern of movements or maneuvers, silk ribbons waving in fanciful evolutions. And this is what the borer's gallery looks like, or rather like the ribbon's absence, imprinted, something to place in a museum between the dodo and chambered nautilus. And yet, and also, the poetry of trees is a poetry of persistence. I think that it can be easy to feel immobilized by the horrors of environmental destruction, but that doesn't feel like a particularly useful approach to take. And I love that following this, there's a tree giveaway, because I feel like planting trees is like the most life-affirming act of resistance that we can do. So this next poem, this is a poem by W.S. Merwin from his book, The Rain in the Trees. And it's titled Place. On the last day of the world, I would want to plant a tree. What for? Not for the fruit. The tree that bears the fruit is not the one that was planted. I want the tree that stands in the earth for the first time, with the sun already going down, and the water touching its roots, in the earth full of the dead, and the clouds passing one by one over the leaves. And I think I'm just going to read one more poem. My tree planting poem is much more mundane than Merwin's. I planted a couple of serviceberry trees 2 years ago, and serviceberries, they can be grown as trees or as big shrubs. We don't have a huge yard, so they seemed a good choice. The native tree, great for birds, provide cover. But trying to find them was an interesting challenge. And what I found, I was like, but is this serviceberry a native tree? So that comes into it. But yeah, so this poem is called Tree Shopping, but if you stick around, you can get a free tree. You don't have to go shopping. Oh, I should show you the serviceberries. These are the serviceberries. There's some lilacs behind them. They're small yet, but they're just blooming like crazy right now. Tree shopping. Rarely is a tree one thing. I'm searching for serviceberry, but find Melancar X grandiflora autumn brilliance. Name to rival a racehorse and showing a similar commitment to breeding. Melancar equals serviceberry. X equals crossed. I picture a brightly lit lab, but read it's a natural cross between the downy and Allegheny, common names which recall mountainside, understory. Though what natural means here, I can't say, or can only say grandiflora, grand flowers. And they are, these milky white blossoms among the few blooms at the nursery. A man in Illinois further cultivated it to arrive at its autumn brilliance, but we're still half a year from that. Today, I want to unscroll us to woodland and some other animal's selection. Cedar waxwing with taste only a bird tongue can toggle. The hoverflies sketch a vibrating halo around the lacy flowers. They look like tiny bees, newly emerged, singing this one, and making me hope we haven't traveled too far to be of service. A man lassos 2 skinny trunks with sold tags, and I cart home the trees with their lovely overburdened names. And so just to close, I was also going to share a video. I'm going to skip that for the moment because I'm worried about my tech possibilities. But because I'm a professor, I have to give you homework now, and your homework is to write a poem about trees this weekend or whenever. So a few ways that you might go into this. You might try writing a poem about a tree that you remember from a childhood home or neighborhood. You might try writing a poem about trees that bears witness to climate change, deforestation, or other environmental threat. Or you might write a poem about the grounding, persistence, or connection you find among trees. And while I'm giving you homework, I'm going to also put a plug in for on Sunday, Sterling Nature Center is doing a poetry extravaganza from 2 till 4 p.m. I don't know if some of you knew or know Charlie Itzen. He organizes that out there. Charlie's great. There's always a great turnout, and everybody is welcome. You're welcome to bring a poem and read it, or just come on out and hear poems and be in nature. So I'm happy to take, if folks have any questions, I'm happy to take them. It's not in there. Yeah, go ahead.
What do you think about, I think that a lot of times we try to put trees into the human box, you know, and we view them as humans. But one thing that helped me was when somebody told me that trees were us, upside down and inside out. And trees actually have their heads in the ground and their feet are up in the air and they run around sometimes. So when I started to view trees like that, or other plants, all plants like that, it changed my way of viewing them. And it's not in a human.
Yeah, I love that. And I hope you write a poem about it because that's beautiful. And yeah, I think that's absolutely wonderful. And that's something I think about in my poems. And the ones I've shared today largely link into like human connection with trees or interaction with them. The fractal one may be a bit less. And that's usually how I come to it, but I do also really admire authors like, I think it's Richard Powers, The Overstory, where he's like going actually into kind of the sensibility of the tree. And I feel like that's kind of dicey territory that makes me nervous, but then some people do it just beautifully. But I love the image you just created, and I hope you like that. Yeah. Any other questions? Or... Oh. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. All right. So our last speaker is Melissa Fierke. Come on up. I'll pull up your thing. All right. Nice. Okay. I'll share this one. Okay. You want to come over there? I think I've got it all set up for you. Okay. Stand here.
Oh, the
Use
microphone.
this. The microphone. Okay. I'll introduce you real quick with my script. All right. So this is Melissa Fierke. She hails from SUNY ESF in the Department of Environmental Biology. Her research has mainly focused on forest insects like the emerald ash borer and their parasitoids, as well as landscape variables with black-leg ticks and their affiliation with human diseases. Today, she's going to be giving a talk about managing the emerald ash borer, which is, in line with her research, and releasing and increasing the parasitoids to control the emerald ash borer and to protect the ash trees. So there we are. There's that for you. Can you click on or hold it, whatever works for you. And then to full screen. Yeah, try to click. Yeah, it works. Okay, got the magic touch. I think it looks. Okay. Is it good? Little corner things going there. Gotcha. I'll pin this. Okay. All right. And if you want to stand in front of here. So there we go. They can see you now. All right. So thanks everybody for being here. This is an ongoing project that has had many folks contribute to it. I've been working on it. Well, when I was hired at SUNY ESF, I was like, okay, how am I going to differentiate myself from my PhD work? And this was already identified. And I said, well, I'm going to become the New York expert on emerald ash borer. And I started, talking to folks, especially the DEC, and making friends and forming collaborations. And it led to a lot of research that I'm really proud of, and a lot of graduate students that have helped. And for this particular talk, a lot of it is from Tim Morris, who recently finished his PhD with me and is now a postdoc, and my USDA APHIS collaborator, Julie Gould, who is phenomenal. Who's going to make it go? Thoughts, ideas? Maybe it's just my talk is too, it's too good. The PowerPoint is too big or do something. Maybe it's because I planned this. If you click into the PowerPoint again, will that help? Let's try to exit out of this. Let me try for you. Should I? Not that.
Just try sharing it again and seeing if it thought we were still like in the Zoom or something.
Okay,
There we go.
That works. All right, perfect. All right, so I wanted to give a brief overview or information to folks who may not know as much about emerald ash borer, where it came from and what it's done through time. But I always, kind of want to start with, this picture of how it's spread. So from when it was originally identified, and then how it is spread out across all of the US. And my PhD student, Tim, gave a talk last summer, and there was 35 states, and now there's 36. So it was found in Oregon recently. So it's here to stay. We're not, going to get rid of it, eradicate it. And so how else can you try to start saving some of the ash trees? So there's 65 species of ash worldwide, 18 in North America, and the three most important, especially here in the Northeast, are green ash, which tends to be riparian or around lakes. And they're very resilient. They're often planted in urban areas. White ash, which tends to be a more upland species, and then also black ash. And black ash is particularly important because it's one of the only trees that can inhabit some of these cold wetland areas up here in the north. And it's also very important culturally to indigenous peoples. So, when we discovered emerald ash borer, we knew immediately it was going to be bad, some of which was talked about in the first talk with regards to when you introduce a novel organism, it doesn't come along with its mortality agents,
right? It doesn't come along with its predators and its parasitoids and its pathogens. And the trees here had never seen anything like it. So they didn't have that evolutionary history and that defense. So in New York, they pretty quickly, knew it was going to be a problem. And so they looked at, okay, where is the ash? What is the ash distribution? And so that's just a map showing that. And, a lot over here in the Western New York, but also all up through. And I remember going to, our Huntington Forest up at the Adirondack Ecological Center early on. And I was taken into this forest that was just absolutely gorgeous. It had huge hemlocks, it had huge ash. And I'm just like, I just wanted to like cry. Hemlock Delgid, Emerald ash borer, they're both coming. It's like, but so these are just some pictures showing you, what it looks like. And as I drove up here, I actually saw a lot of dead ash, and having lunch with Kristen, it's here, right? It's not causing widespread mortality yet, but yeah, it will soon. And so, it's a little more difficult to enjoy, getting out in the woods. It can be hazardous, even alongside highways. And then, of course, in urban environments, this is what some of these areas can look like. And in Syracuse, we've already lost quite a few trees. So I'll come back around to that here in a second. So it's, of course, a beetle. The jewel beetles, the buprestids, or metallic wood boring beetles. And we were just, terrified of this functional loss of ash within the landscape. And so thank you so much for your poem. You've already talked a little bit about. So when they make these galleries, these feeding galleries, what they're basically doing is taking out the phloem. So when trees fix carbon in the leaves, it comes down through the phloem, right? And so if you lose all of that phloem area, you can't get food to the roots. And that's basically girdling the trees and killing them. And this shows where emerald ash borer is native to, likely came in on wood packing material, as do quite a few of our other wood boring beetles. So Asian longhorn beetle, the wood wasp, Syrinx noctilio. So with world trade, this is happening, and it's going to continue to happen. I mean, there's a lot of folks at some of these ports trying to stop this, and they have, stopped a few, but they're slipping through. So early on, there was efforts to manage emerald ash borer. There was a couple of eradication efforts, which did not work. There was early work on how to more easily detect it so that you could try to get in front of it. Delimit means you're just trying to figure out how large the infestation has grown already. There's some mechanical ways. So early on, some of the research we did in our lab was, specifically girdling trees to make them sink trees. So if you girdle them, then they become very attractive, and EAB will come and they will oviposit, and you'll get a lot of larvae in there. You can cut those trees down and chip them up and kill a lot at that point in time. It's slowing, it's not stopping or eradicating. And then emamectin benzoate was shown to be very effective. So you put it, it's a systemic insecticide. So you inject it at the base of the tree and it's taken up. So you have to get the injection points into the xylem, which then take it up the tree and out to the leaves. Adults chew on it, they die. And then larvae, as it comes back down through the phloem, eat it, and they die as well. So this is actually a really good mechanism to save individual trees, very high value trees, but not going to be used in people's woodlots or at a larger scale. Biological control, there was a bit of research on that early on. And then of course, the pathogens and then the parasitoids were the big ones. And that's really what I'm going to focus most of the talk about today. And from there, the DEC has also done quite a lot with education and trying to get folks to stop moving firewood, buy it where you burn it sort of campaigns. And a little bit about the biology, just to have a basic understanding of it. So you have adults that come out And then the females will lay eggs, and they're very, very tiny. So they lay them in bark crevices or around the edges of mosses and lichens. And the early instar larvae chew out into the tree, and then they have 4 life stages. So these 4 instars that they go through, and then they pupate in the tree. And so this is called a J larva. You can see why. And then these are different stages of from pupa to adult. And then of course you have the EAB again. So nice picture here taken early on in the infestation. So just a brief overview of the biology to familiarize you. In new infestations, or where they're just getting to, they exhibit a 2-year life cycle, and then that goes to a 1-year life cycle. So you get lots more as the populations are building. So talking about the biocontrol agents, the parasitoids. So these are really, really small, tiny parasitic wasps. They don't have stingers, they cannot sting anyone, and they're very specific. They've been tested through the USDA APHIS, very rigorous testing protocols in place now to make sure that these parasitic wasps are very specific to emerald ash borer. And I was just going back and forth with my PhD student, talking to him. There's the Spathius, which I'll talk a little bit more about. It also attacks one other jewel beetle in the US, but that's the gold spotted oak borer. And we're still trying to figure out if it's native or not. It's in Southern California and causing massive die-off of oaks down there. So I think that they might proactively be like, send us some. And so here's what releases of parasitoids look like. We're doing a pretty good job. We're doing a pretty good job getting these parasitic wasps out there. And you know, there's some counties that don't have them yet. And some of our research shows that they move pretty quickly. And I'll show you this as well. So getting them up here, and I think y'all are releasing some here as well. So that's great. So some of the work that we initiated back in 2015. So the EAB was discovered in Syracuse, New York in 2013. And, you know, then it's like, oh, it's right outside the door, outside my door. We can start doing some research on it. So worked with other collaborators and started up a project to look at helping our city, county arborists. So I even talked to the Common Council in Syracuse, New York, and said, y'all got to get in front of this. You've got to have money allocated. You've got to be able to, you know, save these trees until we can hopefully build up the biocontrol densities so that then they can help manage. And so that's what we've been doing since 2015. Wow, 8 years. How can it be 8 years already? That we started releasing these parasitic wasps in Syracuse, and then we had partners that did it in other cities as well. So seeing if it would also work in places beyond Syracuse. But again, with the idea that we're saving some of these high value trees that could be hazard trees with the insecticides, but if we're getting the parasitoids established, then at some point they can stop treating those trees, right? So to have something there that's more long-term. And so here's a picture. So you have 2 treated trees here, and then this was a tree that was originally treated, and it's part of this scientific process where we asked the arborist to remove treatment from that tree, and it was obviously too soon, right? So he's gone back now and has treated some of the trees that weren't this bad off in order to try to save some of those, and then we'll try it again, probably this year off of a subset of trees. And so to just give you an overview of what we did is we released parasitoids where these stars are along Lay Creek in northern Syracuse. And then we put up these yellow pan traps in order to look at where the parasitoids, if they're dispersing away from the release points, and how fast they're going. And so we called this our release plot, and this was our control plot. But as you see, pretty quickly, we started getting positive hits, especially of the Tetrasticus here. So I should have can I step back here? Talked a little bit more about the parasitoids. So this is so tiny, so tiny. You would think it was just a fleck on your hand, like a tiny little fleck of dirt. Such a small parasitoid, but it attacks eggs. And then both of these are larval parasitoids, and they're going to be targeting the last couple of instars of emerald ash borer. But as you can see, this one has a very short ovipositor, and this one has a longer ovipositor. And so the idea is this one will be able to target larvae that are in branches that have thin bark, as well as in saplings. So as you get the seedlings growing into saplings, really trying to protect them. And then this one has a longer ovipositor, so it can, as the trees mature into larger and larger trees, then it can be there to protect them. Okay, so back to here. So as we released Tetrasticus, it very quickly spread out. And so despite it being such a very small wasp, it was able to fly very far. And then this other one is Spathius galeni. And again, it has that longer ovipositor. And we also started picking it up pretty quickly too. So that's really exciting. And then if you look at the trees over time, so here's the trees that were untreated in Syracuse. And when we first started doing this study in 2015, and over time, what happened to those trees. And so let me step back again. So these are trees and they're very healthy. So in 2015, a majority of the trees were very healthy. And so over time, you see the number of healthy trees decreased. And here's the next canopy class, which they've got a bit of leaf dieback. And then the canopy class 3, even more dieback, 4 almost dead, and then 5 are dead. And so you can see what happened to our cohort of 100 trees over time. So there was a distribution of, healthy trees, less and less healthy, but over time, you can see what happened to this cohort. And these are control trees. So these are untreated. And so now let's look at the treated trees. So it works. Treating them with this insecticide keeps them alive, while these started declining. But you see, there's still a few of them there, right? And these never got insecticides. And so we just started looking, and it's hot off the press. Basically, we did these peeling events in March, and then Tim just went to Boulder 3 weeks ago, and he was in Naperville last week. And so this is science in progress here. So we peeled 100 branches from 100 trees to look at how many larvae, emerald ash borer larvae, were still present in them. And so what we found was in Syracuse, we found 11, only 11. And so that was really exciting and happy about that. You'll see that there was more in the other 2 cities. I'm sure they're not doing as good a job of it. No, I'm just kidding. There's just variability, right? But you can see the mortality that's happened here. So the parasitoids, so these are control trees where they never got any treatment. You can see the amount of parasitism that's going on in those control trees. And then these are the trees, oops. Just a touch screen too, it makes it go forward. I learned something. So, wait, that's not where I want to, it went back. All right, and then these were the removed treatment, and these were the treatment trees. So we didn't find any emerald ash borer galleries or established galleries in the treated trees in the control site, but we did in the release site. So again, variability. So this is hope, right? That we have released these parasitoids, we've initiated this biocontrol, and that hopefully it's going to keep ash in the landscape. And as I was talking to Kristen over lunch, she was very excited. And okay, let's end this with more hope. And so just as y'all were coming in, I was adding these slides because this is a really exciting component too. So we released parasitoids in ash stands in Randolph, New York, in Western New York, as well as in the Hudson River Valley. And so if you can see the whole thing, it's called ash persistence. And so here was the initial distribution of trees in those different crown classes. So here's healthy trees in these stands that we released the parasitoids in. Healthy trees versus crown, starting to show a little dieback all the way down to how many were dead. And so as you look at this over time and the number of trees, here's what happened. So this is now from this time, which was 2013, and we're going forward to 2021. So the class 1, so the healthy trees, there is a number of them that are still there and they're still healthy. And so that was very exciting. The ones that were further along died, right? So those, of course, the ones that were already dead stayed dead, but the ones that were in the category, heavily declining, they went ahead and died as well. But we still have live trees out there. We released parasitoids in 2012, 2013, and 2014. So it's been 8 to 9 years later, and we still have living trees. So it's hope. It's hope. And then here's looking at a breakdown with the small trees versus the large trees. And so in Eastern New York versus Western New York, we still have a lot of these healthy trees that are persisting in the small tree size classes as well. And this is just a breakdown between the large trees that are still persisting in Eastern New York versus Western New York. And so in Western New York, there's quite a few of them that are still alive. And again, having those biocontrol agents in place, and we've been monitoring, they are established, they are there, they are parasitizing emerald ash borer. So a little more hope. And then this last bit that I wanted to talk about is the how quickly that the parasitoids can disperse away from a release point. And so this work took place along the Greenway just south of Rochester. And so this is a very linear pathway where you have ash that basically line it. So it's an ash corridor through the landscape. And as we were racking our brain, like, how can we quantify how quickly it goes away? And I was like, oh, there's the Greenway. We could do it along the Greenway. Let's give it a try. And so this was after the first year of release, we caught no parasitoids. So we put up the yellow pan traps down the Greenway. But we did catch a lot of emerald ash borer in the traps. And then the next year, we started catching the parasitoids quite a ways.
So did the parasitoids, did you bring them to that area?
Yes, so we released them. We released them.
Really?
Yep, we released them there.
Is this along a rail trail or something like that? Or
I think it's an old canal, along an old canal. Yeah. So the Genesee Greenway. So yeah, and so here you're seeing as well that the parasitoids are moving. So they're moving down this trail and they're building up. And here was the last year that we monitored. So they move relatively quickly, even for a very, very small wasp. A question?
Yes, where does the parasitoid come from? Is it from China?
So they were sourced from emerald ash borer's native range. Yes. And we knew they were there because they have outplanted some of our ash trees in China. And so that's where they went to find these parasitoids that were causing mortality of emerald ash borers, because our ash trees that had been outplanted there had emerald ash borer. And then they identified some of the parasitoids from those plantings. Yeah. So great question. So anyway, so this was, back in 2016 that we were monitoring. We caught none the first year, and then we started catching them further and further away down this greenway. So that was a really great finding, and it was also, as we were doing this, we also were able to track emerald ash borer and how it was moving down the greenway. And by this year, the parasitoids had caught up with emerald ash borer. That was fantastic to see. So yeah, the other thing we found is we also put up traps away from this greenway, and we found the parasitoids dispersing across farm fields and 3 miles away. So 3.9 kilometers, sorry, speaking kilometers metric, away from the greenway. So that was really nice to see as well, that they weren't going to be stopped by that. All right, so again, just this quick summary here, that they can catch up very quickly and rapidly disperse. We didn't detect the egg parasitoid or this other parasitoid that we released, but this particular one, later on, we saw with climate matching that it wasn't going to establish in New York. Just another little bit of good news is that I had a PhD student a few years ago, and he did a lot of work making sure that the parasitoids, the phrenology matched, and he was the one that was like, that the one agrilli isn't going to establish here, so it's just too cold for it here. And so they went back and they identified another one, which is Spathius galeni. We also, I don't know if y'all remember or had the big Valentine's Day freeze of 2016. Who remembers that? It was bad. In Syracuse, I think it was -35. It was really, really cold. Anyway, so we did our normal yearly peeling, and we just found all of these dead larvae. And we're like, what's going on? Why are all of these larvae dead? And so, opportunity for another paper. So it was a winter mortality event. That freeze actually killed the larvae to a great extent, which was good because that knocked it back enough that the parasitoids then could build back up with the emerald ash borer. So that was pretty nice to see. All right, with that, a lot of collaborators, a lot of people that have contributed to this, graduate students and research technicians. So yeah, thank you for being here and listening to the talk. And with that, I will take any questions that you may have.
If the ashes are going to die, what kind of species would fill this ashes?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I should turn the question back to you. You do a lot of that, right? So it's right now, it's what's coming back up is a lot of maples, right? And it depends on where the ash are being lost. I'm just really worried eventually we're going to have all buckthorn. And I was talking to the urban forester there in the city, Dave Nowak, and we actually had an increase in urban forest cover, and they were excited. And then they went back and it was like, oh, it's all buckthorn. So that's one of the concerns is as you lose ash within some of these forests, you may get non-native, multiflora rose, Amur honeysuckle, that sort of thing. But again, with us going back and looking at some of the forests where we got the parasitoids established, there's seedlings, there's saplings there. So with that, we think there's hope that we will keep ash in the forest. So as a component of the forest. Yeah.
Why is it that parasitoids aren't being used in all the counties in New York State?
Yeah, we didn't buy, folks haven't released them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are they available through
Yes.
DEC?
The USDA APHIS or Ag and Markets. So early on, it was Ag and Markets that we were working with to release. We had to have all sorts of permits early on, but we don't require those anymore. So now it's just finding somebody who will make, the contacts and get them and release them.
Okay, and is there a responsibility to track the results?
Yes, but they're not always followed up on.
Okay. Good.
It's very good to go back and make sure they establish, but I think at this point in time too, we're seeing establishment. And yeah, and my PhD student who just finished just got a postdoc, and he's looking at dispersal, and I don't have it, of course, but he's looking at where we released the different parasitoids, and he this summer is going to be putting up traps, as well as we're now getting these little logs, and they have EAB in them, and we put them out for 2 weeks, and then we bring them back in and we look at if the parasitoids are there or not. So, at this point, Tim's going to do that for the whole state, which is crazy. He's going to go out and he's going to see where they are now, and we're going to see what might be the areas that we need to target to force some of these releases. So he wrote up this proposal, he sent them in, and APHIS was like, yeah. And so they funded him to do that this coming year.
One of the things I was concerned with is it seems that DPW, public works people got really scared about what was going to happen with the ash trees once they were infected, and thought that they would go out and let's just cut all the ash trees down first.
Yep.
And I know some people in our community did that.
Yep.
Is there anything being done to stop that?
So
Approach.
that was why we wanted to do this IPM project. And I got the city arborist in Syracuse on board. I mean, he was like very excited to do this and happy to do it. And we were really surprised that we were able to get the funding to do the insecticide treatments, which have continued. And again, now that we're seeing this is very, there's a lot of positivity around that. So we need to wrap this up, which is also on Tim's plate, and get it published and get that information out there. But it just takes so long, right? It takes so long to be able to show there's hope. And otherwise, for a day-to-day and liability, sometimes
That's what happens.
Right.
They're so afraid of the liability of leaving the ash tree.
right. And they may not have the funds to use the insecticide treatment. But it actually, it protects them longer than we originally thought it would. So 3 years, pretty good protection, and even up to 5 years, it can still help, but you got to do it after that. Yeah, question?
Yes, I went to a seminar on finding actions that are naturally
Resistant?
and then more common than that.
There are folks that are looking at that. It takes a lot of time to put into that, and then to know. I mean, you can only really know that if it's blown through and you made no efforts to try to save any of them, right? So yeah, at this point in time, there are folks looking at it, but those are really concentrated in Michigan, which is it was just where it was originally from, right? So they are looking at them there and trying to identify. And even with folks proactively taking down ash, there's still a lot of ash out there that has been left. And I get an email once in a while saying, my ash might be resistant. Do you want to come look? And I usually pass that on to the DEC folks, the forest health folks in DEC. Yeah.
When you mentioned Michigan, it seems that there might be a genetic marker of some sort that one could track and therefore discover a genetic structure that would endure and resist.
Yes, so there are folks looking at that at the Ohio State University. So there's some, folks that are looking at tree defenses and genotypes and phenotypes. There's some that are doing crossbreeding to the ash, the Asian ash species to see if we can get that gene in there. But that takes a really long time. And then, you know, some of them, they don't seed for a long
That's
time, mature.
Obviously, wonderful possibility.
Yes, yeah, for sure. And there's been a lot of efforts gathering ash seed and storing it, so that at some point, if we can bring those back into the gene pool as well. So, yeah,
That's all. the
Sorry.
time we have for- No, you're okay. It's an interesting topic. Everybody loves it. But thank you so much. I want to thank all, yes. All right, I want to thank all the presenters for coming and giving their talks. It was really great. And thank you to everybody on Zoom who joined as well. That was awesome. And to have Susanna here too. And so, yes, we are having a giveaway today, right after this, which will be held right outside the doors. So everybody who is here can come get an English oak if they want to. They're free and we'll tell you how to plant it and everything. So thank you, everybody, for coming. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.